the Voice of Retail podcast. My name is Michael LeBlanc, and I am your host. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Veteran retailer, entrepreneur, investor, and friend of the pod, David Louis, is back this episode with his new business partner, Canadian retail legend Joe Mimran, in an exclusive interview to talk about buying Vancouver's Kit and Ace, a retailer with an origin story that goes back almost a decade to its founding by Lululemon lead designer Shannon Wilson and son JJ Wilson. We talk about their impression of the brand today, what makes it great, and growth plans for this innovative apparel retailer. Gentlemen, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
Excellent. How are you doing?
Fantastic. Thanks, Joe. David, how are you?
Awesome, Michael. Awesome. I'm sitting here in the back room of a Kit and Ace store in Gastown, Vancouver, BC.
Well, wonderful. You're kind of foreshadowing the news. Well, listen, this is multiple times that you've been on the podcast. First time for you, Joe. So, David, welcome back. And Joe, welcome on board. I can't believe I've almost got to 400 episodes without having you on the Voice of Retail podcast. So I'm glad you're here. There's not many people here in Canada who would know the two of you, but I got a bit of an international audience as well. So, Joe, let's start out with a little bit about your background and how you got to be you and what you do today. What's a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I go way back to the first days in the industry where I started with a brand called Alfred Sung. We created that brand. We were a manufacturing business right here in Toronto and realized very early on that brands really controlled the industry. It was the retailers and the brands. So we wanted to create a brand. We went to the U.S. to try and find a brand and then realized we should create our own. And so we hired one designer. She didn't last. She said she was off. We said, wait a minute, don't leave. We're going to make you famous. And she left anyway. And then we hired Alfred. We said, we're going to make you famous, make you a brand. And within 3 years, he hit the cover of Maclean's magazine as the king of Canadian fashion. That was 1983. 1984, we wrote a licensing agreement for a fragrance. That was a 50-year licensing agreement for fragrance, and it ended up being distributed to 50 countries, 60 countries around the world. That was with Riviera Concepts. Then came up with a concept called Club Monaco in 1984. We opened our first store in 85. We expanded all over the world. And in 2000, sold it to Ralph Lauren. And now lots of ups and downs during that time. But the brand got extremely well known. Then I retired for a couple of years. I had also started a company called Caban, which was a home store, which a lifestyle store. And then met up with John Lederer, who was the CEO of Loblaws at the time. He said, Joe, can you design some home products for President's Choice? I said, yeah, I think I can do that. He said, all I need is 20 products, but boy, that's our jewel, President's Choice. So anyhow, we designed some home products that turned into a full-time gig. Then they asked me to create a apparel line, and created a line called Joe Fresh that ended up becoming the number one brand in Canada in both units and dollars within 5 years. And then I retired from Joe Fresh. I did a few years of Dragon's Den. Did a little bit of venture capital work with Gibraltar and Company. We invested in a bunch of different businesses. And one of the businesses was Tilly, which we've now reinventing. And we've just recently just made another acquisition. So, that's my history in about 3 minutes.
Well, two questions. One is, did you always want to be in retail, or was it for you an accidental career, or did you always say this is where I can hang my hat?
I've always loved fashion. As a 12-year-old boy, my mother was a couturier, and so I would get her to make my clothes for me. It was kind of embarrassing at the time because I'd be wearing bell bottoms and yellow mohair sweaters. Luckily, I was a tough kid, I loved the arts. I love fashion. I actually in university took I got my BA and had sociology and fine arts as my majors. Then went on and got a real degree, which was in accounting. And so I had both sides of the brain working, but always loved the arts. I opened an art gallery when I was 19 years old, and and loved the blend that fashion brought, which was both, you had to have both the artistic side and the business side
Sure.
in order to be in that business. And I love the way that comes together. So yeah, it's always been in my blood.
Well, and the other, I guess, wasn't a question, it was more a statement. It seems like the only thing you're not great at is retiring.
Yes, I've tried it a few times now.
David, you and I have known each other going back probably 15 years, so it's wonderful to get you back on the mic. Tell the folks a little bit about yourself. You're described as a Canadian Tire executive, but you're so much more. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, thank you, Michael. And it's always a pleasure to be on your podcast. And you've been a dear friend of mine. So retail industry is pretty small. So thanks for having me back. And also with Joe. I mean, what an awesome cast. I'll try to match his description. But a little bit about me. I was born into retail. Merchant family out in Vancouver, BC. Went through school, high school. And then right out of high school, I decided I wanted to venture on my own versus going into post-secondary. So I made a trek overseas, and being my first trip, I was enticed with a very interesting brand called Theme. And with the amount of immigrants coming into Canada, I thought, what an opportunity to bring something home to their new home in Canada. So this was actually 89 is when I brought the brand over to Canada and established a 15-store chain between Toronto and Vancouver at a very young age.
No kidding.
School of hard knocks, of course, and went through that. Had a great run, and over time, just with the interesting scenario and partnerships, I eventually sold my stake. But really progressed in my career where I had the opportunity to join with several other international brands. Went off to Esprit, had an opportunity to turn around the brand at that time, revamping the retail store business as well as the B2B business that we had. And then from Esprit, I didn't want to move to Germany. That was the opportunity, was to move to Germany. Another brand called Nygaard came. I went there as the head of retail.
Oh, I didn't know you were at Nygaard. I didn't know you were there. Yeah, I forgot about that one.
Yeah, very interesting school of fashion business.
Yeah.
But I was head of retail, eventually grew into marketing. That's what really got me excited about marketing. And just throughout my career, just from Nygaard on, and then within the last 8 to 9 years, I spent time at Canadian Tire, where I was heading up the marketing and the whole basically e-commerce and digital branding, repositioning of the Marks brand into casual wear, as well as spearheading the repositioning of Sport Chek to a much more broader audience. So I spent a really great and fun career in retail, could not leave it. But the last 3 years, I was CEO of a semi-precious gemstone that was mined in one part of the world, which is southern Alberta. And turning something that is purely Canadian, only found in one spot, and turning it into a luxurious good of jewelry and fine art. But this now, fast tracking to where I am today, while I'm sitting here in the back row of Kit and A store, partnering with Joe and Frank Ricchetti on an exciting opportunity with Kit and Ace, and that's where I'm at today.
It's a great overview, and let's talk about that. So it's exciting news, the Kit and Ace acquisition. But before we get there, let's start at the beginning. This partnership of yours, David. Talk about this new co that you formed with Joe and Frank. How did it come together? Was it over a glass of wine somehow, or did you all kind of know each other before? Just a little bit of how it all came to be.
This all came to be quite quickly. It actually came through a coffee with George, who was the previous owner here at Kit and Ace, who ultimately bought it from Chip about 5 years ago. And we just had we had an interesting conversation where he was looking for advice, as peers within the industry. Which became a lot more deeper discussion about the opportunity to partner with him, and it just came about that it may be an opportunity for me to invest. And then when I connected with Joe, the same passion you had in our discussion about Kit and Ace was the same spirit of how I feel about the brand. And this was, I think, about in March of this year, and we never turned back. This is a bit of history of where up until today, this is where we came from.
Now, Joe, this is, to say the least, not your first retail venture, and you've had lots of opportunities to work with all kinds of different people. What do you think the combination of yourself, David, and Frank brings that's unique and powerful? You've had a lot of partners, and the 1 + 1 = 3, I'm sure, is one of those things you look for. Talk about what the three of you bring to the table, so to speak, to make this and other ventures really successful.
Yeah, well, we hit it off with David right away. I love his attitude and his enthusiasm, but really, at the heart of it is really the fact that he's been in the business for quite some time, and he understands retail and still has a passion for it. I think that's probably one of the most important elements, is to have that desire and that passion. And I think when you combine that with our capabilities, we have obviously design and development capabilities, sourcing capabilities. We understand retail ourselves. I've been in it for, as you said, very long time. We've had some successful exits. So this is a brand that can really, I think, go much further than it has. And I think that it's got a very, very good base consumer. The consumer that Kit and Ace has sort of zeroed in on right now is one that can be grown, I believe, I think with the right amount of attention. And we're also coming out of a post-COVID moment, and I think people are ready to come back to shop in retail stores. Sure. We're seeing a movement back into retail stores. We're seeing certainly this desire for technical clothing continuing to grow. So we see it as a growth category. But it's this loyal customer base that's been built over the last 10 years that I think is very valuable. And I just think that a little more attention has got to be paid on, some of the product offerings and some of the, some of the, certainly on the women's side more than on the men's side. And between our capabilities, David's, willing to run this thing day to day. I've got lots of other things that I work on in addition to Kit and Ace. So, the fact that he's willing to spend 100% of his time and really dig in, which is what retail needs. Yep. Retail is a contact sport. It's
not a spectator sport, that's for sure. It's not a spectator sport.
No, it's not, and it's relentless. It's every day you've got to be on it. And you've got to be committed to doing that. And I think having the hands-on that David brings is going to make, I think, a very big difference. And then we've got, some individuals who've been with the company for a long time now. George, which is, the CEO. He was the CEO. I think having his experience and sort of learnings over the years is going to be very valuable, also from an operating perspective. So, you combine all of that. Frank, who's a wizard on, all things logistics, organizational. He's a, great partner to have. You're talking about a lot of years of experience that's coming together. So hopefully the consumer will like what we do. We're not looking to change the base customer. We're looking to enhance. We're looking just to enhance it and to also to fuel it. To invest in it and to take it to the next level, which is what it requires.
Let me follow on that kind of brand discussion, and let's talk about the Kit and Ace brand for a bit. I mean, as a brand, it's gone through highs and lows, right? I mean, tremendous expansion, tremendous contraction. It's not a heritage brand. I wouldn't describe it as a heritage brand. It certainly was a leader in a very specific category. So when you sat back, even before you got into looking at having a piece of the action of the business, what's your perception of the brand? It's not Tilly, which I think I'd call a heritage brand that you're modernizing, right? Yes. It's different. Yes. It's something different. Describe how you think about it.
It's very different in the sense that it started as a technical cashmere brand, and that was the underlying premise for it, and it morphed, and it's and the way it morphed was into being a technical commuter type product geared to, I would say, this very active millennial customer who goes to work, gets on his bike, goes out for dinner, all in the same clothes.
Right.
And that's a lifestyle change that has occurred where people have been dressing and have continuously dressed in this more casual way. And Kit & Ace has sort of captured that spirit of it, but have not taken full advantage of that positioning. That's how I would position it. And it's almost been neglected. I think it got off to such a fast sort of growth mode that the expectations were too high. And then when demand wasn't there against the original expectation, I think there was a pulling back as opposed to letting the customer come to them. They were sort of, it was more push rather than pull.
I mean, the industry might say ahead of their skis a little bit, right? Yes. We might say
over their skis, as they say.
And you think with the current, it's interesting because I'm going to follow on this point, and then David, I want to get to you talking about the future. But it's a small business relative to four stores. So, but you think there's enough of a solid base of a loyal customer?
Yes, I think
something to build.
Yeah. I think what's missing, Michael, is that they have a very strong e-commerce business. So their the e-commerce business is much bigger than the four stores, and so the physical presence may not be there, and that's really why we're so interested in the business. Now, like you said, it's still a fairly small business.
Yeah.
But I would prefer it being at this size right now. Trying to change a business with 100 locations is very heavy.
Very difficult. David, you would know how difficult that is with the work you did at Mark. So David, let's turn our minds to the future state of the brand. I mean, it's day 3, so let's not get too far ahead of our skis in the conversation. But I think you've got in a mind of how you're going to grow. I mean, on one hand, the category is a little more crowded than it was. We would say Kit & Ace created a category. Some others have followed. What do you see as remarkable about this brand that you can grow and leverage from?
Well, Michael, I think the word you just used, leverage, is a core focal point of mine. I would kind of back up what Joe mentioned, a little bit more stats. We do have a tremendous fan base today. If I look back at over the last 3 years, this is during the pandemic in 2020 up until the end of 2022, the revenue side actually has grown 10% per year. So very positive. And the fan base is tremendously strong because 66% of our guests who bought from us 2 years ago are still coming back to us. So that's tremendous positioning that we currently have. And quite frankly, that was a major attraction of mine to the brand, is that there is a lot of brand love that previous owners have built and quite frankly underutilized. So, but going forward, we believe not reinventing the game. It's really further pushing along the premise that it's built on over the last 5 years, and the product is more what I call movement friendly comfort. It is purely made to last. Even if you look at our Navigator collection, currently on floor, our men's bottoms business is fantastic. The product fit, the fabrication's easy to care, and ultimately made to last. I think that sets us apart from many other brands. And
David, for those who may not be familiar with the brand, what's your kind of average price point? Give me a sense of what a purchase looks like at a Kit & Ace, just so people can kind of open their minds to what category you're playing in.
Yeah, I say we're more premium. We're not fast fashion. We do use quality fabrics. With it being easy to care and made to last, say again, a shirt of an average price point of say anywhere from 110 to 130 around there. Pants, our top selling pants is around 190 to 220 type of range. And the fact that you don't need to dry clean the product.
That's great.
And slip it on with a lot of care and comfort. Literally, I was traveling China early part of this year, and I was wearing the product literally almost other than sleeping in it. I was moving and be able to survive the hot weather in China. So the product is tremendously well made.
Joe, you've scaled a lot of businesses before. You know what it takes to scale. What does scale look like? Is it, I think you've already more than hinted, more stores, certainly in Canada. You see global expansion, David's expertise in e-commerce. What's the secret sauce in your mind for sustainable growth for 2023 and beyond for this brand?
For every brand I've ever worked on, I think at the heart of it is amazing product and product development. And if you don't bring that proposition to the table, then you're going to have a hard time growing. So, that's where we're going to focus. A lot of my energy will be focused on the development of the product itself, and we will continue to evolve it. We will continue to bring incredible value, incredible fit, incredible product, all within the brand ethos and within the brand identity. I think understanding who you are and what you are as a brand is super important to being successful, and making sure that your voice is always true to that. Now, consumer tastes change. They move around. Sometimes, brands have a very consistent voice, but then the consumer will move away from them because of shifting tastes.
Sure.
But having said that, I think that's where, again, it's very important to stay on top of consumer sentiment and really tweaking and adjusting without trying to make a harsh turn on the brand identity.
It reminds me of the challenge as a department store Eaton's had, right? How do you grow but not alienate your existing base?
I think sometimes you do have to alienate them a little bit because, depending on the age, Simpsons had this problem many years ago where they had the white hair set and they just couldn't, the blue hair, and they couldn't move away from them. And then it becomes too late. I think that happened to, I always say, if Woolworths 5 and dime had just lasted a little longer, they could have been the dollar store, which became a phenomena.
Yeah.
So I don't think, things never change as much as people think. The only huge step change was e-commerce, but even that now has become more of an omni-channel situation. And at the end of the day, it's still about amazing product, being authentic, speaking with a real voice, servicing your customer, listening to your customer. All of the same tenets still hold true today. And you have to be a slave to those tenets in order to succeed in our industry because it's so competitive.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, if you're not ready for the battle and if you're not ready to work hard and to keep your antenna up and be humble, because, this is a game that will humble you every single day if you're not careful.
You're one quarter away from being very humble, right? All the time. David, when we talk about trends, last couple of quick questions. I mean, it feels like one of the big changes that came out of the COVID era or our modern lives is kind of the change in work from home and the way we relate and travel around cities. It feels like Kit and Ace is right in that trend. Like you would be a beneficiary of that trend. That I'm going into work today, but maybe I live closer to where I work. Like, is that how you're thinking about it as well when you think about growth and trends?
Absolutely. I think we are in the right space where there's a lot of movement. People are on the move. The travel industry are already experiencing a massive rebound. Tourism here in Gastown has basically returned. So yeah, definitely in the right spot of when people are moving around. And I've been living the bit of the consumer journey of ours here in Greater Vancouver.
Yeah.
You just jump on the SkyTrain.
Right.
You come to work, right? And then after you work, you either grab a drink or you run off to play pickleball or something. And the product that I'm wearing, it definitely allows me to do so comfortably.
Last question, Joe, to you. Last question goes to you. Advice to retailers. Advice time. From both of you, actually, but let's start with you, Joe. 2 starts and 1 stop is my way to kind of frame advice. 2 things retailers in general need to start doing today to be successful. 1 thing they shouldn't do anymore. What do you think?
Well, I think they've got to listen to their customer, number 1. Number 2, I think I mentioned omni-channel. It has to be an absolutely seamless experience between your online experience and your store experience. I think if you don't have that going, you're going to be in deep trouble. So really take the time to ensure that's totally consistent. And then finally, be careful. Don't overexpand bricks and mortar. Make sure that you expand intelligently, and I think those are the key things right now. And just be true to who you are as a brand.
And David, what about you? I mean, I when I think of this opportunity, I think, what's the right pace for expansion, and what's your advice to retailers who are trying to grow but don't want to, again, get ahead of their skis? 2 starts, 1 stop.
Great question. I'd like to mirror what Joe said, but I would add, don't silo yourself based on terminology, meaning direct-to-consumer doesn't mean it's just e-com. Direct-to-consumer is also physical stores, right? So it's not D2C, B2B, B2C. It is the omni approach to serving your customers however they want to buy and experience yourself. Because human nature, we can get into these silos and get stuck into buckets.
Sure.
No, it's holistic, and think of everyone holistically.
All right. Well, fantastic. Well, gentlemen, it's a busy week for you, I'm sure. So thanks a whole bunch for joining me on the podcast. David, I think one more time and you get the 5-timer jacket. So I'll have to get you back on. And Joe, you get the 1-timer jacket. So thanks for joining me on the pod. And listen, gentlemen, best of luck to you. I think you've got a great brand and sounds like great opportunity ahead. So much continued success.
Thanks very much, Michael. Been a pleasure.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, be sure and follow on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically each week. And be sure to check out my other retail industry media properties, Remarkable Retail Podcast with Steve Dennis, and the Global E-Commerce Leaders Podcast. Last but not least, if you're into barbecue, check out my YouTube barbecue show, Last Request Barbecue, with new episodes each and every week. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, consumer growth consultant, president of Emmy LeBlanc and Company, Inc., Haven Media, and keynote speaker. If you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at meleblanc.co. Safe travels, everyone.